Well, welcome everybody. This is our fifth Planning Democracy and APRS winter webinar series, fifth of the month. So Planning Democracy, as probably most of you will know by now, we campaign to get a planning system in Scotland that works for both people and planet. And we've been working very closely with APRS for about 3 years now. APRS, or Action for the Protection of Rural Scotland, Scotland's countryside charity, whose work includes planning, in particular around green belts. So this is an additional session that we've put on for you. So I guess we've now jumped from being a winter webinar series into a spring webinar series. And because these sessions have been so well attended and well received, it's great that there's still so much interest. So thank you all for coming. And as I just said, the sessions will be recorded, so you can always access these afterwards. And I know that quite a number of people have been viewing them. I think we had about 60 people view the last one on the video afterwards. So they're useful. They're a useful resource for you that you can share with other people in your community council or your communities as well. And of course, as always, we'll be sending on the PowerPoints and any links that get mentioned in a follow-up email. And our speakers very kindly tonight have agreed to follow up with answers to questions that they might not have time to answer tonight. So we can send on those as well. So as you know, these webinars are free, which I think is exceptionally good value for money. So PD and APRS, we both run on an absolute shoestring budget. And whilst we do achieve a lot, it does require a good deal of voluntary hours from both Nikki and myself, really, to do as much as we do. So you can really help us by signing up to give regular donations to either of our organisations. And I think Barry might be putting some links into the chat to our donations pages. So I would urge you to try and sort of give us regular payments for money if you can, because that really helps our work to provide more guides and resources and campaign and do research and to respond to the ever increasing number of inquiries that are coming in. So so that's the donations plea. Tonight's session. So in our previous sessions, we've had quite a wide range of people. We've had the Department for Planning and Environmental Appeals. We've had a community perspective in the session we did on green belts. We've done a PD and APRS focus on the last session, and also Nick Wright sort of perhaps brought a professional consultant perspective. And we felt at the end of the last sessions that a local authority perspective was missing. So we asked Trevor Moffat from the Improvement Service, and he kindly offered to seek out some local authority officers who might help us. And we're very grateful to Gillian and Anthony for agreeing to come along tonight, despite their busy schedules. So during these webinars, we've recognised, I think, we've said it, that planning departments are chronically under-resourced, and there's a real need to recruit new planners. So maybe someone tonight might be a little bit inspired to become a planner, or maybe encourage their children or their grandchildren to become planners. So we asked Gillian and Anthony to look at this session very much in the spirit of encouraging better collaboration, communication and understanding between planners and communities. I think there's a huge scope for collaboration, but it's not always easy for that to happen, given everybody's time constraints and so on, and the complexity of the system. So tonight, I hope we'll be a step nearer towards a better understanding between planners and communities. and hopefully achieve the joint aim of getting a robust local development plan that protect and enhance our places and nature in place. So, so tonight's agenda is going to include Gillian Dick, whose title is Spatial Planning Manager, Development Plan Group at Glasgow City Council, and also Anthony McGuinness, who is getting an award for the longest job title of the webinar series, I think. He's Service Manager in Development Planning, Environment, Climate Change, Creative Placemaking and Urban Design at Angus Council. And then following that, we'll hear from Trevor Moffat, who's the Planning Skills Project Manager and Head of Planning Scotland Secretary, also competing for the longest title at the Improvement Service. So welcome to our speakers tonight. And so we're going to have Gillian first, and then she's going to be speaking, and then she will answer some questions, but then she has to dash off as she's got some girl guiding duties to go to. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gillian Dick from Glasgow City Council. Thank you.
Let's put me off mute. That's a basic failure starting off. Yeah, I am heading off to guide, so let's see what I can do. Let's keep our fingers crossed this will work. I work at Glasgow City Council, and I was being told some of the stuff that you guys were doing, so I thought I would start with a very brief summary, and I thought it was useful to put that into the slide because I hear you've had some kind of briefing on what planning does, but it's really interesting to kind of look at the full gamut of what we do and to think of it not as a linear path, but as a kind of going round the loop or going round the infinity loop. So everything sort of comes back around. I'm not going to go into any detail in this, but you'll be able to see it in the slides and kind of look at some of the things. And if you understand that, you can understand why, and it is an excuse, why it's sometimes difficult to get the collaboration and co-production right. But we're trying our best to do that with the limited resources that we've got. Other bit to kind of give you a heads up is that, and you'll have seen it in the National Planning Framework 4, is there is a lot of different things coming into planning and we're needing to know all about them. And I often describe planning as being a jack of all trades and master of none. And you have to be very quick at understanding new concepts and trying to understand them professionally, but also explain them to communities as well, whether that's communities of colleagues or communities of people or communities of interest. Again, I'm not going to go into any great depth in this, but it'll be on the slide pack if you want to have a look at it. At the heart of all this is the stories that we tell about the places that we live. It's all about place. I love the quotes from Patrick Geddes. I love what he's saying about it's all about live, work and play and where you live. And I love Jane Jacobs' quote about if you don't like a place, why would you fight for it? So it's that dull, inert places. We kind of try and encompass that now in Scotland using the place standard, but I've also pulled up the graphic about place and wellbeing outcomes. But it's all about connecting communities, those communities being resilient and giving you room to be innovative. It's about community wealth building, the amazing environments we've got and using nature-based solutions now. But it is also about understanding what the data is telling us, what the spatial data is telling us, what the maps are telling us, and building some digital twins and using some of that technology to help us. There is the thing, and I've gone and done the classic thing of cutting off and moving things. It is about the right development in the right place. I've just chopped off the last bit by moving some graphics around. That was terrible of me. But it's about just transition, climate adaptation and net zero. So just as a reminder, I often describe what we do or what I do as taking a place-based approach, using nature-based solutions to deliver climate adaptive spaces and places. That's about all the challenges that society faces because they all happen in the same places. They all happen where you live. It's about looking at those solutions and trying to think how we can design at scale. That will bring in biodiversity and looking at the biodiversity, the environment, the health and well-being, the social cohesion. It's about inclusive governance, taking people with us. It is about economic feasibility, but we're trying to get away from just the economic balancing the books by the bricks and mortar. It's about those balanced trade-offs between all the things that society wants the spaces and places to do. That needs some adaptive management, and we want to mainstream that and make that sustainable. To take it into a Glasgow context, because that's where I work, we have a development plan. The existing development plan, and we are, like every other council, working on the new version of that, talks about having healthy and high quality places in a compact city form or a compact urban form. Every single council in Scotland will talk about being vibrant, thriving, connected and green. And in Glasgow, we encompass that with a placemaking principle that covers the whole of the city. And we have a number of policies below that that cover the key elements at the minute. You'll be seeing changes because we now have the national policies within the national planning framework, which we're all now trying to work with, as well as some of our own policies. Bring that down, we have a number of other statutory documents that we feed into the planning process and sit as sibling documents. I'm going to highlight a few of them. So this is the open space strategy for Glasgow. It's not just about counting the quantity of the open space, it's understanding whether it's fit for function, and fit for function for who, whether that's humans or habitat, young or old. Everybody reacts to a space in a different way. When you get the slides, you'll be able to link to our PAN 65 map, which is the quantity map, and you'll be able to link to our open space strategy, which is now nearly 4 years old. But when we're looking at open space, a lot of people keep talking about green, but the biggest open spaces in Glasgow are blue and grey, namely the Clyde, the Kelvin, the Canal, and our grey spaces, which is our footpaths and our cycleways. And we need to remember that and try and green them and make them more resilient to the climate change that's going on. But that also means there's a kind of mishmash of terminology. So some people might think the encompassing thing is a green network. I tend to talk about it as the open space being the encompassing thing because that's the statutory document we have to produce, but it covers things like green roofs, green walls, rain gardens, etc. When we think about the open space, but also when we think about the development plan and others, we can't do it in splendid isolation. It's influenced by national legislation, by strategic drainage partnerships, by strategic cycle plans. It has a close relationship to the LBAP, food growing, sports pitches, green parks. Parks and Green Space Vision is our parks management plan for the stuff that we own. We have to take cognizance of strategic or the regional development plans. This slide is a wee bit old, but it's quite a nice one. City Development Plan, and you can tell how old it is because it still refers to National Planning Framework 3, but it's 4. And we have to take cognizance of whichever council we're working in, that council context, but also we need to be aware of the climate emergency, the ecological emergency, and the financial constraints to our planning services, to our communities, and to our councils as a whole. Just to give you an idea, if you remember that the development plan talked about livable, healthy, and resilient, in our open space, we're then trying to look at the access and the quality, the quantity, the setting and amenity, the views of the public, how we use our city centre and grey spaces, how we use the spaces for play and education, outdoor sport, growing spaces, walking and cycling, how we can use them to deal with air quality, pollution and heat, flooding, enhancing the biodiversity, connecting the habitats, mitigation, adaptation, and blue spaces. All of that in the same place at the same time, trying to do a balancing act. And if we're being really honest, we need to work out which open spaces we need to retain, where we need new open spaces because the population is always moving and it's changing demographics, where we need to redefine the open spaces. So maybe we don't need a public golf course anymore. Maybe it could be a growing space in a smaller park, and where we have redundant spaces where maybe we would be swapping them out with development spaces, and that development space becomes an open space and we develop some housing with some additional open space on it. We have to do these kind of realistic discussions. But in all of that, we're trying to work out how we can put a value on our open spaces in the same way that we put a value on our bricks and mortar. Forest and woodland strategy in Glasgow is out for consultation at the minute. We've tried to do that as a story map to make it easier for you to click through. Again, the link's embedded in this. But we're also developing a digital model so we can start to ask questions. So this is the digital model for Glasgow that we've developed. Because our parks colleagues have gone out and measured some trees or done some information on trees, the darker green is where we know we have more detail on the trees. And that means in the 3D model, we can actually have the trees looking in 3D, but we can layer planning applications on that and a whole load of other information. And we're trying to work out how we can put that dashboard out to the public. We need to make sure that the data we've got on it, if we're sharing it with you, is public-facing open data. All of this means we're looking at how do we give you more guidance? How do we make data-driven decisions? How can we manage the resources we've got? How can we get people asking the map? So asking a question about what they want the outcomes to be. So that parameters or criteria. So if we want more street trees, What type of streets do we want to put those trees in? Where can we put them? Do we know where the cables and pipes are? Do we know they're not going to impact on a listed building, etc.? How do we do feasibility studies to get things ready for any funding that's there, that's shovel ready? And are we building with nature, or are we just following policy and guidance? And do we have demonstrators and methods of delivery? We have to talk to a whole load of people. So on the left, you're seeing kind of all the statutory, the big players that we need to talk to, but also equally important are the communities of interest, which is what you guys are, young people, old people, those that live in a place. Our young people will live in the places that we are planning for far longer than you or I will live in, unless there's anybody young on this call. And they will have to live the consequences. So to a certain extent, their voice needs to be louder. National Planning Framework 4 has all of these policies we have to take cognizance into. Not going to go into any more depth than that because I think you've had a bit of a briefing. Just wanted to share, we were on a Horizon Europe project that looked at how you plan, deliver and stewardship things, and said we need to move away from that linear process of everything having a beginning, a middle and an end. Actually, you're going around this infinity loop. You're looking at the planning of something, whether it's a strategy or an action. You're looking at how you deliver it and who you deliver it with, and then you're looking at the long-term sustainability of it. And in all of those things, you're looking at your technical solutions, your governance, your financing, your entrepreneurship, your co-production, you're reflecting on what you've done. So it's okay to fail as long as you learn from it and you're honest about those failures. It's better to try than not try at all. And we need to get better at doing that impact monitoring and assessment and doing that continuously. There is a really nice tool called Co-Impact. Again, the link will be provided in this, or I'll send you the link, which is a really nice tool we've developed for communities of interest, whether it's local communities or professional, to talk about the impact of proposals and projects and how you measure them for social cohesion, health and well-being, environment, economic and biodiversity for both the humans and the habitat. And it will not let you just pick impact assessment for economy. It will nudge you behind the scenes to say you really need to measure health and well-being. Just in case, the other thing we have to pay cognizance to is the place efficiency assessment. So we're doing some work in Glasgow around the place efficiency assessment. We're working with the young people to develop how we ask them questions, and then they themselves are asking the questions about how they play, where they play and where they want to play. We've done some work in Glasgow with the primary school kids. We're currently working with the secondary, and the pilot results from the Pollock area has over 350 kids completing and giving us some information. We're also tying in the play standard. But it's a neat way the Scottish Government have challenged us to talk about play. We cannot get the evidence report through the gate check to allow us to develop a development plan until we have a proper signed off place efficiency assessment. So until we talk to the young people and our councillors have signed it off and the DPEA have signed it off, we cannot proceed to do the development plan that will unlock development or identify new open space. So in theory, the children have the ultimate say. They're not happy with how we've done a place efficiency assessment and we can't show that they've been collaborative in that. We can't actually get through the gate check. But it's about how and where they play. And whilst it's focusing on children, adults play too. So if we can create a great place for children, we're creating a great place for everybody else as well. So it's about play for all, every ability, every age, and being inclusive and diverse in our design and who we're talking to and how we're talking to them. It is tying into the place standard. And if you're aware of the place standard, there is now a young person's version, a children's version, and a climate version. There is also an air quality version there that you can use, and there is a designer's version. I will stop there. Thank you.
Well, that was a whistle-stop tour. Thank you very much. We've got 5 minutes for questions. I can see that, Roger, you've put one in to the chat. Shouldn't open spaces be linked to provide wildlife corridors? And I was also wondering, Gillian, if you could tell us how often an open space strategy is renewed in general.
Okay, so the linkage bit, the green network bit, is a fundamental component part of open spaces. So when we're looking at the open spaces, not only are we being challenged to identify the quantity that we've got, we've also been challenged to identify the quality of them for both humans and habitat, and the accessibility. And that's about linkages. What we don't want is disconnected bits of open space, which is why when I was talking, I was saying in the Glasgow context, we really do need to look at the grey and the blue, because the grey and the blue provide us the opportunities to make those connections for both the humans and the habitat. There will be opportunities by using vacant derelict land and by using development contributions or developers, getting them to link some of those up. But some of the opportunities are in our own gift in the way that we redesign streets and roads, by greening them and making them more comfortable. Some of those green connections are in places where humans should not walk and will never want to walk. So the railway embankments are great green network connections for some of the habitat, but I wouldn't encourage anybody to walk along the habitat, along the embankments or along the side of the M8, for instance. But they do form a fundamental part in a very urban environment. They are part of the green network for the non-humans amongst us. And open space strategies, in theory, are on about a 10-year line. They're meant to kind of hopscotch over the development plan. So if you think the development plan's on a 10-year, the development plan informs the next iteration of the open space strategy and the forest and woodland strategy, then they in turn inform the next iteration of the development plan, along with the forest and woodlands. What we're trying to work out in Glasgow is how often we do an update, because there will be new open spaces coming in through development, and there will be communities saying we want this to be protected as open space, and we need to get an equitable review process in so that we're not leaving it for 10 years. So we're trying to work with our councillors to say, right, if we come back to you every 2 years with an update, is that good enough? Or do you want us to come back more frequent? What we don't want is going back every single month to communities and to councillors to say, right, we need to put another one onto this map. We need to update this. So we need to look at how we do that. Any more questions?
Right. Is that you putting your hand up, Anne?
Yes, yes, it is. Hi, Gillian.
Normally I would encourage people to use the chat, but I know that Anne sometimes struggles with that, so
Go for it, Anne.
The eyesight's not good enough for it, Gillian.
It's okay. I will say I've got to dive to guides in 7 minutes, so go for it.
That's okay. Right, 2 points. How much weight is given to the public input in terms of the locations and what's where? And I mean, this is the voice of the people who live there, who know the space better than anybody. Is it regarded as that anywhere?
Yeah, so we are being challenged, and both Anthony and Trevor can answer the same kind of question. We have to take cognizance of the public view. What we also have to do is, if you look at planning, it's for the public benefit. So we've got to balance out the needs of, and I know, I get it, you know, we've got to balance out the needs for housing, the needs for transport links, the need for walking links, the need for open space. What we're trying to do is, and it's why I say doing place-based using nature-based solutions, you can have multifunctional spaces. Where we run aground sometimes is spaces that have self-green, that have been abandoned for a long time, and communities start saying, that's our open space, we want it zoned as our open space. Yeah. In my world, what I want to do is get the value of keeping that as an open space, because it's capturing carbon or it's improving people's mental health well-being, versus the financial value that is on the books at the minute. And at the minute, I often use standing on the street beside Drumchapel Park. There's a social work office on one side, Drumchapel Park on the other. Social work has a financial positive value on our books because it's bricks and mortar. They can depreciate it and they can get funding to rebuild it. Drumchapel Park, for all the benefits it brings, is a negative equity on our books at the moment because it's just seen as a burden because of the maintenance costs. We don't have financial, that we should be putting a positive value on that, but we don't have all the positive values worked out yet for how much carbon it's capturing, how much it's improving educational attainment, how much it's improving people's health, how much it's you know, cooling the area down when it's hot and all that. That's what I and my colleagues are trying to get, so we can say the real value of Drumchapel Park is not 0 or minus 50,000 a year. It's actually £1 million a year. So therefore we need to keep using it. And the same for some of our vacant and derelict land, because at the minute, particularly in somewhere like Glasgow, the vacant and derelict land being left with trees or greening is probably got a better financial value than trying to sell it off. But we can't win that argument until we've got the data and the evidence. At the minute, it's financial, and we're going up against big business that is using that as a mortgage value somewhere else.
Yeah. Air quality, my background is open cast and landfill.
Yeah.
So obviously that's why I connect to air quality.
Yeah. So air quality is one of them. I sit as the HOPS rep on the Cleaner Air for Scotland too. We've now got placemaking and behavioural change higher up that agenda. It's not just about emissions and everything else, but our open spaces, our woodland, our planning, if we plan it right, can improve the air quality.
Yeah.
We have to be cognizant of that, and we have to tie in with Cleaner Air for Scotland too as well. So yeah, it's one of the key evidence bases we have to look at.
That's lovely. Thank
Emily,
you.
thank you very much. Thank you, Gillian. I suspect you have to go, but I thank you for agreeing to answer any further questions. So if you've got any more, I can see
Thank
Susan,
you.
you've got some in
Thanks.
there. Maybe we could answer that either if Anthony doesn't.
Yeah, send them
you
through, or
could-
try, and Anthony's smoking up with it. Try Anthony and Trevor first. If not, they'll come back to me and tell me. I apologise, but I've got 30 kids waiting down the bottom of the road to do 2.5 hours of guides, and I need to go, otherwise there'll be mayhem. But I'll quite happily answer any other questions if you send them through to me as an email. If Anthony and Trevor can't, and a warning to Anthony and Trevor, don't just say you can't when you can, because you want to laugh at me trying to answer them. But yeah, you've got the presentation, and if the links don't work, I can send the links on. But I am now going to vanish, and I'm terribly sorry, but I need to go to guides. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Gillian. And now I'd like to introduce Anthony, who's come from a more rural local authority in Angus, and he's going to take us through his slides. Thank you, Anthony.
Thank you. Just going to share the screen. Somebody can just let me know if they can see them. That'd be great. Okay. Well, I probably have got a long title when I've been challenged to reduce it, but as yet I'm failing it. I've worked in a lot of different types of authorities. Predominantly, most of my experience is in Ayrshire. I've worked for all 3 Ayrshire authorities, and I've also worked in Western Bartonshire Council. So I've worked in different types of councils and different types of areas with different types of challenges and issues. But one of the things that the new Planning Act and the new planning system in Scotland is quite keen on is a lot of engagement and collaboration, much more than we've had in the previous round of development plans and before that. It's one of the things that's fundamental in all the acts, and I'm pretty sure that at least Nick will have went over that with you, and who did the session on the new planning system, so I don't tend to labour on that as much. So what I'm trying to do is I just wanted a brief recap on the LDP process. Sorry for putting people through it, but then I want to sort of take you through the timeline and just give you some of an understanding of why things take so long, and give you a real life example in a council, which is my own, of how we've got to that time frame. I also would like to take you through where to engage, collaborate, and where you'll be consulted on in the new LDP process. Again, that's based on work that I'm doing in Angus at the moment with our new plan. I'll go through the call for idea stage, and I'll take you through what happens after the examination, because that's quite confusing for people, what happens after the long-term part of this process. So you've probably seen this diagram before. It is just showing you the process, and it is taken from the government's guidance. I'll go back to that in a minute. And the first stage is evidence, then it's plan prep, and it's delivery. So what the government sort of say, and this is the time frame which I'll try and put into a bit more realism for you. They say normally it should take you 2 years to do your plan, and then 8 years for delivery. That's wishful thinking. And that's with my actual council hat on, my employer's hat on, but also my professional hat on. It's going to take much longer than that, because there's an awful lot of stuff. I counted it, and don't quote me on this, this is just my own personal counting on it, that through the new Planning Act, all the new regulations, all the things like forestry and woodland strategies, and in the LDP guidance, the government have put 128 new unfunded duties on development planning teams in Scotland to deal with. Some of us are very small and don't have the resources to deal with that. That also includes local place plans. So if you take that in context, 2 years is not enough to do a plan with all the engagement and consultation that we're required to do. So what this doesn't tell you is the actual first step. There are 2 first steps in the planning process. One is your development plan scheme and participation statement. You have to do that annually. And the second one is you have to invite constituted community groups to prepare a local place plan. That's the first 2 things you must do. But what's the development plan scheme? So I'm just going to assume that none of you might know what one of these is and just talk you through it. So the development plan scheme and participation statement sets out the council's timeframe for its local development plan. What it must do is set out the stages, an indicative timeframe, that's in financial quarters to make it even more easy for communities to figure out what Q1 means and what Q2 means instead of monthly. But it sets out the main stages where the council thinks that it is going to be at a certain point in time in that year. It's meant to also inform you of how you can be involved in the planning process through its participation statement. But what the government did, and I'm not sure if any of the other sessions covered this, is they changed the format for a development plan scheme and participation statement. Before, in the last system, the council just did it annually and then would put it up and just notified people through normal means. The new Act made us actually consult you all on how you wish to be consulted in the new system, and we have to do that annually. So that gives you an opportunity to get your views on how you wish to be consulted, what stages you want to be consulted and what you're interested on, and so on, depending on what council does it, what way. Those are sort of the questions that we asked in Angus. But this is to help us with engagement and consultation, but also actually in collaboration. It's about to find out where our resources should be best placed at a certain stage in the process to get meaningful collaboration out of our communities, stakeholders, and the other bits and bobs that are in the planning system, such as developers and landowners and so on and so forth. So that's what that does. Each council in Scotland is statutorily required to do it on an annual basis, and every one of them now has to consult on you. This was the first time that we'd done one for the new system, so we adopted ours in December 2023. So every December we will update that, and we have to go through the same process every time. So that's the first stage in the system. That sets out how a council is going to engage and collaborate and consult with its communities and all of the other people it's required to consult with. If the session covered it before, you'll see there is a lot of statutory requirements to do that, and young people, children and young people, gypsy travellers, older people, and people with disabilities have been elevated to be positively discriminated in favour of in EQIA legislation. Those are the ones that we must actually consult on. We have to demonstrate we've consulted on them as part of the evidence report and also the proposed plan, and also members, the general members of the public and key agencies, all that are other requirements. So there is a lot of statutory requirements that we must do, and this sets out how we will do it. So this is an LDP process. This is the one for Angus for its next development plan. You can see that it's not 2 years to get to a plan and 8 years to delivery. It's just not. All of those new resources, all of those new issues that we have to cover, and our resources means there is absolutely no way that any council in Scotland can do a plan in 2 years. No chance. It's going to take a lot longer than that. The Act and some of the regulations state that the new plans, the government's intention is the new plans that have to be produced should be within 5 years of National Planning Framework 4 coming into formation. That was the 31st of, that was March this year. I think it was the 31st, I might be wrong. But 5 years, no chance. Councils will be roughly 3 to 4 years of preparing their new plans at best. But that is basically all of the stages that we have to do. And that's in case everything goes right. That's us getting all the evidence back from statutory stakeholders, government, other people. That's carrying out all of the engagement and collaboration requirements. That's us actually writing it. That's us taking it to gate check. That's assuming that we'll be 6 months at gate check because we don't know. It's assuming a 3-year preparation of proposed plan. That's taking into account the local place plan timelines, of which we said we need ours in by the end of December 2025 to give us a fighting chance to put all proposed plans. That's taken into account an examination, adoption, and then the delivery programme. That is pretty much everything going right, and having staff and nobody retired and nobody going off sick, and getting some consultants in to do work. That's for Angus. It might be different with different sections, different planning departments of bigger councils, but roughly from all the information I've got, and Trevor can quantify it later, that's a rough time frame. It's about anywhere between 3 to 6 years to do a plan. That's a realistic time frame. It's not 2 years, and it will never be 2 years. So taking you through engagement, collaboration, and consultation stages. So you'll get the slides. So if you don't see this on your phone or your devices, don't worry about it. The slides will come back. But this is taken directly from our development plan scheme and participation statement. So it's just 2 examples of how we've gone around setting out what we will do. If you can look at it, it sort of says what the stage of the plan preparation is. So for evidence report, that is all the people that we have to consult on. And Gillian touched on this in her things. These are the methods that we may use to do that, and the aim is engage and collaborate, and that's in line with the national standards for community engagement that the government have got, and early sort of citing of draft versions of the government's local development plan and engagement guidance that will be coming out. So as you can see, it's all about engage and collaborate, consult, because I don't see the point of engaging members of the community without doing meaningful collaboration with them. Our approach is to fulfil the Community Empowerment Act and the place principle. I'm not entirely sure if anybody's heard about that, but that's about trying to reduce silos and working with our communities to deliver things in collaboration. So generally, that's how we see it in the evidence report, and how we will do it at proposed plan. That is the breadth of people that we have to engage in with in that time frame. So as you can see, that's why it's going to take a number of years to do both stages. So, call for ideas. This is another thing that's been introduced by the local development plan guidance by the Scottish Government. I will say this is not a statutory requirement to do. It's an entirely voluntary process for councils to undertake. This will add time on to do it, and basically that's a call for ideas, a call for things that the LDP should look at, policies, visions, sites for development, sites to be protected, nature. That stage, depending on how a council does it, can involve all of that, and that's to seek views from a wide variety of organisations, stakeholders and members of the public and communities about what that means. But this is entirely voluntary. This is not a statutory part of the system, so I must emphasise that. So there will be a lot of councils that will not do this because, to be frank, and Angus is saying, we know every single site a developer is going to throw at us because it's the same sites they've thrown at us for the last 20 years. So we kind of know that, and it'll be just different iterations if we put it back out. But we haven't made up our mind as a council whether we're going to do this stage. It depends on resources, it depends where we are in the system, and it depends on a lot of pressures about do it. If we can do it, we will do it. But at this point, we're not entirely sure of the merits and benefits outweighed to the time taken and the resources required to do it. But as I said, that stage is there, but it only appears in the local development plan guidance. It's not a statutory requirement. So you've done all your proposed plan, you've engaged with all of that, people have joined into you. What happens when it gets past an examination? So the examination of the proposed plan is only looking at objections to the plan. It's only unresolved objections. That is all the Scottish Government reporters will look at. But what happens is once they've gone through all those considerations and have had further information, hearings, public local inquiries, written submissions, whatever they want to do, they will come back with a report which will summarise a lot of things that have been done before, all the objections, and come to a conclusion. Then it'll come to a set of recommendations. Councils can only choose not to follow those recommendations of the reporter on 3 grounds. Environmental grounds, the reporter couldn't have reasonably reached that conclusion for the information in front of them, and also because it would have a significant adverse impact on an environmental designation. So those are kind of the 3 grounds, and there's legislation about grounds for declining recommendations. So basically, you have to accept the reporter's grounds unless you can demonstrate all of that. So once you've done all of that, you then go to adopt your plan. The difference in this system, and I'm not sure the other sessions would have said this, is that normally you would have sent your plan to the government. The government would then have decided whether to allow you to adopt it or not. They could direct you to modify your plan at that point in time, further than what the reporter's report done. That is no longer there. It is the council that adopts the plan, and it just sends it to the government. The government have no say in the adoption of the plan anymore. So basically, after that's adopted, you've got 3 months to do your delivery programme, and that's about how you're going to deliver the plan. Government expect that to be tied to the council's capital and revenue programmes, but also to be realistic in how long developers and other things are going to develop sites, but also if there's any sort of conservation area appraisals and so on and so forth come from, how long that will take. Once that is all done, it is down to delivering the plan. That's what happens next. That plan is, along with NPA4, is used to decide planning decisions. So again, that's what happens after it. People will sit in planning applications for sites, or they will put it on, or they will apply for sites on different pieces of land that might not be allocated. That's technically what happens next. And as I said, it is all about delivery. There are new regulations coming out about when you can amend your development plan. I've read it. I'm going to give you my professional view. I can't make heads or tails of what the government expect us to do and what the trigger points are for local development plans. But we can alter or amend certain parts of the plan. It is an expedited procedure during all of that as well. I won't try and sort of bore you with those details because it will just overcomplicate it. But we can amend certain parts of the plan, but that's not new. The 1997 planning system allowed you to do that through expedited procedures. So it's come back into vogue of how to do that. So generally, that's a whistle-stop tour. I hope that people have followed that and I've not spoken too fastly because I'm from the west of Scotland. That's an occupational hazard about where you live and how fast you speak. But I hope you found that enlightening, and I'm happy to take any questions either through the chat or ask directly. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and that was really, really helpful. I actually learned an awful lot in that. So thank you very much. I see. I'm going to ask a couple of questions from the questions that were sent in prior to the webinar. I see, Donald, you've answered the question, and you also sent in a question about local place plans. Hello, Donald. Long time no see. How do communities ensure their local place plans, if they have them, are given proper consideration in the local development plan? And you're sort of questioning why the local authority should have a say in local place plans. So if you could touch upon local place plans, Anthony.
Yeah, so I guess that Donald's read all the legislation and guidance and everything that many people have done. There is a statutory requirement for us to do a lot of things in local place plans, i.e. invite constitute community groups to prepare one, tell them what resources we've got available and what we can and cannot do, and then give them a date of when local place plans have to be sent in to be considered as part of the LDP. So the guidance and the regulations tell you all what a local place plan must include and how you have to go about it. So I'm not going to go into that because it will tell you to do it. But generally, local place plans have to be given due consideration. That's a really, really, really legislative term, due consideration. What does due consideration mean? So local place plans, no matter what the government think are going to happen, are just not going to be restricted to physical stuff. They're going to look at softer issues. They're going to look at non-planning issues, non-site issues, but also they could stray into terms of community action plans and things like that. That's what we're going to have to deal with, and I'm sick of telling the government that's what will happen. You can't just restrict the community to looking at physical means if they're going to put the time and effort into it. Also, the question is, it could cost you an awful lot to do one of these. I've done various different versions of these in previous councils, and one of the plans I had in Western Barnshire looked at early adoption of how you would do these things and how you would do it in a sort of community planning partnership model, and you can be anywhere between 10 to 20k to produce one of these, unless you've got a lot of professionals that have expertise in this. That's how much they could cost, but we're only to give due consideration to them. That doesn't mean we need to take them into account. We've just got to consider them. There is a statutory requirement that a local place plan can actually tell a development plan or a council when their development plan needs to be reviewed. Again, due consideration, we can take that into account. So the legislation doesn't really help how local place plans have to be taken into account, and it doesn't really help communities consider whether they should do one or not, or whether it's worth the time and ink it's written on. There are better ways of doing this, and if planning is to be in the public interest, and I sort of say it should be for the benefits of communities, then we have to work with all of our communities to do that. And we have to find better ways to do this, because if you look at councils' finances, they're not great all over the board. So we are going to have to ask our communities to help us out with things that they might be best placed to do that. And how are you going to do that? And how are you going to know what a community wants without meaningfully engaging them and getting them involved in the community, because they know their area best. They live it on a daily basis and they know what it is. So how do you work together? How do you do that in the new local development plan scheme? And how do you integrate all the community's wishes within the local development plan and avoid them having to do a local place plan? That's the $64,000 question with meagre resources and not enough time. However, there are a lot of us that are attempting to do that. It's the approach in Angus that we are taking to do that. That's why it is a 6-year time period, because we want to meaningfully engage our communities and have our development plan as being as far community-led and partnership-led as we can get, and to actually try and physically deliver it in partnership. So some of the stuff might be the council has to do because it's a statutory legislative requirements. Some stuff we can do in partnership because of funding, and some stuff our communities be placed to do, but they have to have the capacity, they have to have the resilience, and they have to have the training, and they have to have the support from the council to do that, because it's a scary thing about community empowerment and taking it forward. And if you're trusting our communities, which we have to do, and we really should get better at trusting them, then we have to go to this model, because the only way out of providing services and helping demonstrate and betterments to towns and keep our nature, keep our climate change, is to do that as a community, and that includes the council, and it needs to be done in meaningful collaboration. So local place plans, my personal professional view, I'm not entirely sure how much they will add to a community, but it's always nice to see a community's views of how they would like to see their area developed. And I would hope that councils would give it more than just lip service when a community spends the time and potentially money to do one. That's just my personal view. So I took my council hat off for the last one. So Donald, I hope that answers your question, or it gives you some insight to how it's seen. Thank you. I'll take the thumbs up that I've done well.
Can I just jump in the back of that, Andrea? So that we have seen some really good examples of local place plans so far from communities, community councils, and even kind of wider community areas that are helping local authorities. So it's out there. They're not. We do have views on how effective they can be, but it's just, if they're there and they're good and they're viable, it's certainly going to help local authority planners a lot through the process. So just wanted to chime in there, just on a more positive note on local place plans.
I gave it positive. I chair the local authorities community learning action plan and local place plan benchmarking and learning group. I'm always positive about this, Trevor, but realism in council terms is another thing that communities should do.
Well, right. we've had a quite a good take on local place plans from Nick Wright in the previous session, so people can also watch that if they want to find out more and they haven't on local place plans. But that was really helpful. Thank you, Anthony. I'm just going to ask one from Chris Alcon, because I can see Chris is here and he sent one in earlier. Chris, you're an ex-local authority development planner, and you were asking after the 2019 Act came in, but before NPF4, and now having joined my local community council on the other side of the fence. So do you think that 10-year LDPs are a step forward? Do you think the 10-year process is a step forward, as the decade-long time period may put people off contributing as they struggle to envisage that kind of time frame? What do you think about that?
It's a long time since Mr. Alcorn's been asking me difficult questions. So again, there we go. Nice to see you, Chris. Hope you're enjoying your retirement. 5-year plans, 10-year plans, 15-year plans, 20-year plans, 30-year plans. We've all had them. We had strategic development plans, which were meant to look 20 to 30 years in the future. Did they work? Yes, they set a strategic vision for 20 to 30 years. National planning frameworks are anywhere between 20 to 50. The first one was to look at 50 years, and they've sort of whittled it back. And then you've got 10-year LDPs where you used to have 5 years. 5 years, I would say, as you probably know yourself, wasn't a great idea because you were on a hamster wheel. You'd finish one, then you had to go into the other, and there was no delivery. 10 years could see a good amount of delivery in the short term, but that depends on a lot of resources and how you manage it. But it gives a better chance that you're actually giving that plan you've spent so long on time to try and be delivered and implemented. and you've got that part where you can amend certain parts if it's not going so well or you need to do it, which makes good. But a plan's out of date the minute you write it, is what a lot of people will tell you. It's out of date. It's a snapshot in time, so you have to look at it as a snapshot in time. And the economy, environment, climate change, all will change quicker than that, and that will have a dramatic impact. So the flexibility to respond quickly, and I'm not entirely sure that is in legislation at the moment, to respond quickly, is welcomed to keep plans as up to date as you can. So I see that part about being able to amend it quickly with an expedited procedure, and Chris, you'll know what I mean by expedited procedure, is welcomed to keep that plan relevant and to keep it as up to date as you possibly can. But I don't have a crystal ball to see if a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, a 15-year plan, a 20-year plan will work. I just do not know. But my guess is it's better than 5 years, because you're off the continual hamster wheel of local development plans, and absolutely, you know, sort of you get away from communities having apathy that you haven't delivered the last plan, or the plan before that, or the plan before that. This gives it as a fighting chance. But as you'll know, Chris, that everybody in their Nelly, including house builders and all of that, will tell you something different. They'll say it's not fast enough, it's not fluent enough, it's not long enough, and so on and so forth. But for us, trying to deliver something, the longer a timeline of a plan that you've got, the better chance you have to get funding and delivery mechanisms in to deliver it. But we'll just have to wait and see with this one. I'd say 10 years is probably a better start than 5. That's just my honest opinion, and we'll just have to see it goes. But I'm pretty sure you know all of that from your time in West Lothian.
Anthony, I guess related to that is Alan Brown's question, which is in the chat, about how valid is the initial evidence gathered at the end of an 8-year LDP cycle. So I guess that's a little bit similar, but also there's another one on timing, I suppose, from Jane. Given the time it takes for local development plan development, does this mean that MPF 4 will be the government's deciding reference point for planning infrastructure? So I guess, you know, with that's about the which plan takes priority, and whether a plan's out of date and so on. If you could touch upon that.
So I'll take the evidence one first. And we had a lively debate about this earlier, so Trevor, I'm not going to give those views, but we're not entirely sure the evidence report stage is, in terms of a gate check, is worth it. But building all that evidence goes back to how planning used to be done. It was like survey reports, looking at different things, trying to gather a huge range of evidence to make informed choices of how things should be developed, and involving communities in that. So I think we've always gathered evidence, and we've always tried to keep it up to date in terms of the legislative processes that we're meant to do and undertaking the length of those plans. But the evidence that you gather from a range of providers sometimes isn't up to the date that you need it for. So, for example, some of the data that we've been looking at, it cuts off around 2022. So you've not got up-to-date databases or up-to-date evidence bases in a lot of subjects. So therefore, you are making assumptions, or you're trying to forward forecast of what that will look at. And that is just to get to a proposed plan. You'll have to look at your evidence base before you submit your proposed plan for its examination, to make sure that that proposed plan is as up to date and as robust in its actual foundations of how it's got to there as possible. So you're double counting the evidence report. So the evidence report doesn't end at gate check. You have to continually keep that up to date, and you have to have your plan as up to date before you take it to consultation. So the cut-off date for it will be when you take your plan to consultation for proposed plan, then you're into objections, modifications, and all of that stages. So the further you get into the plan, I sort of, and try to project 8 years in, if the evidence base is still fine, is basically like the further you get away from the census, and when you start looking into population figures and all that going forward and try to forecast it, that's what will happen. And even if you amend your plan, it doesn't require you to amend your evidence base, because you'd spend more time amending your evidence base to get there. But I do think that when you're amending a plan, you have to have some sort of justification. So that will have to look at, say, for example, your demographics have changed, therefore you need more social affordable housing, or you've developed an awful lot of it and the infrastructure isn't coping, you need more infrastructure to do it. You still have to have an evidence base to come to those conclusions and how to fix it. So I don't think the evidence base will be stopped at any point. I just think it'll be in fits and starts when you get your proposed plan out until you come to replace that plan. And then it could be another, it could be 15 years in. Your plan could actually be okay. It's only parts of it that need changed. So therefore you could amend parts of it without ever having to go back to your evidence base that you started in 2022. So again, the system is very difficult to get a handle on what this all means because, and this is a criticism of government for me, it is not particularly specific on the trigger points to do this. What does this mean? What's the impact in all the stages? It's a bit woolly for us all. But the further you go into a plan, the further you get away from your evidence bases. It's like every sort of forecasting government statistics and stuff. But monitoring it through the delivery programme, which has to be done every 2 years, we'll see if we're on track or not, and that will probably say if our assumptions in the evidence report were right, and that's probably how I would answer that question. So Claire, the second one I've completely forgot because I went on the evidence report. Again, what was the second part of the question? Sorry.
Now I've got yes, it was about the MPF4, the time it takes for LDP preparation, what happens in between.
So basically legislation is clear. What is ever the newest plan takes precedence in development planning decisions. So at this point, for a vast range of authorities, National Planning Framework 4 takes precedent in planning application decisions if there is a conflict in policy. So where basically if the local development plan policy and the NPF4 policy do not align and they're markedly different or they're different, NPF4 takes precedence. The new style local development plans, when they come in force, will take precedence over NPF4 where they have policies that are changed for local circumstances. So it's where they still have policies in it, will that new local development plan take precedent? If the vast bulk of policies are in NPF4, then NPF4 will be where the decisions are made. That's basically it. It depends on what style of policies you've got in your new LDP, where it goes, what it's been altered to, and it's those policies that will take precedence in NPF4. If you don't replace the vast majority of NPF4 policies, they will then be enforced in NPF. The weight will go to NPF4 to make the decision. Hope that sort of clarifies that.
That's great. I think we've got time for one more question, and I'm just going to sort of lump a whole load because we've had a lot of concerns around sort of biodiversity and nature. So I guess it's around, how are local development plans taking protection and enhancement of biodiversity into account? How are green belts going to be protected from developments? And I think there's concerns around renewable energy sites and loss of sort of local designations as well. So if you can, touch upon that, Anthony, that'd be great.
So NPF4 has a lot of protections for the environment in it, and any development has to do net biodiversity gain. So they haven't really quantified why net biodiversity gain is, and that's been in England and Wales for a while as well. But the first three policies tell you how seriously the government are taking this. It's all about addressing the nature crisis and climate change. Those are the first three policies, and the first policy says nature and climate has significant material weight in planning. So it tells you how it emphasises. So development plans have to be consistent with NPF4, and you got two people that have got environment and climate change in their topic together, so you're going to get an absolutely fantastic answer that yes, LDPs are at foremost in front to do it. So for example, if you've seen all the news of the Storm Babette and what it did to Brecon and flooding, then you'll see how seriously Angus will be taking environment and climate change, and that'll be the same for the majority of councils through Scotland. I can't speak for how urban authorities will do this, but I'm sure Gillian gave you a sort of feeling of how seriously Glasgow take biodiversity and protecting the environment that within a city region. So I can't comment on city regions, but I can comment on the plans that I've been involved in other councils. And for example, the one that I wrote at Western Bartonshire took protecting environment and climate change very, very seriously because it had a green infrastructure first approach to development within its plan. It had it embedded all the way through its policies, and it was accredited with the first Building with Nature Excellence Award in the whole of the UK for a development plan because it took it that seriously. That's what I'll be taking forward in Angus. We will be looking to the plan to drive forward and help address climate change and net zero. and a lot of developers will probably not like the approach I'm going to take to it, because I think NPF4 can be strengthened substantially in local development plans much further it can, because you've seen the dire impact so far of getting to 1.5 degrees Celsius of climate change. You go to 2, you go to 3, you go to 4. Yeah, we'll be having wildfires like Australia have in Angus, and we've seen it in Angus already. We had wildfires in a wet climate. So there is no do nothing now. It's about taking it extremely serious, and it's about stop saying that, oh, yes, people need houses. Yes, we've got an affordability crisis. Yes, we've got a homeless emergency, but that has got to be balanced against the climate change and nature change. Because if you don't have land to build stuff on, then it'll all be dry. You won't be able to build on it. And if we keep building on greenbelt land and on green land, or any soil that sucks carbon out of the atmosphere, we're just going to be creating a rod for our own back, and we'll be getting higher and higher temperatures. And if you've read some climate change stuff, which is very scary, that if it continually goes past 5 degrees, Scotland will become like Australia. I mean, the heat might be actually quite good in getting away from like one sunny thing, but that's still that. So all of these climate change impacts will have a catastrophic area on land. So greenbelt land and greenfield land and forestry will be significantly affected, because we're starting to see it. Therefore, you might not have land to build on it if you don't try and balance it up. So at this point, you've seen it all in the press, all the house builders and everybody are on about housing emergency, housing climate, housing struggle, homeless emergency. They are real life things, but they can be solved by building on brownfield land and actually using the land we've got and repurposing buildings without going onto the green belt. We have to flip the business model, and this is the land ownership model, to get real. But that will protect our green belt and our land that we need to suck carbon out of the atmosphere for, by building on brownfield land. And I'm really glad that the government have strengthened that in NPF4. And it's not just about brownfield land, it's about buildings and reusing them and stop knocking them down where you can reuse them. However, that costs finances, and there's the circle all over again. But plans can make a great stab forward about how we take into account nature and climate and biodiversity and protecting it all. It's up to then that to be taken forward by our development management colleagues, and sometimes held by reporters and Court of Session judges. But at this point, NPF4 is diametrically opposed to housing, building and infrastructure delivery to environment and climate change, and that will be the balance. So it comes back to the 3 pillars of sustainability: social, economic and environment, and you have to balance them. And it's a very difficult job to do for a local authority. Hope that answers the question. And
does that mean you'll be reducing your matla in Angus? Does that mean
Oh, I can't reduce it, Claire, but I'll be realistic about how much we can go above it. But it has to be balanced in meeting net zero. It has to be balanced in protecting the environment, and it has to be looked at that way. And I've had conversations with landowners and house builders and told them that the days of them wanting 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 houses might not be viable anymore. Plus, we don't have the infrastructure to do that and the skills to cope with it, unless they've got very deep pockets to pay for all of this. And the polluter pays principle is not really acceptable anymore. It's about stopping it at source. It's about addressing climate change and, emissions from start to finish, from design to supply chain to delivery through to stewardship. Gillian talked about some of this stuff, but that's where we have to go, and we have to get there through design. So green infrastructure first approaches design instead of roads is a way to go, taking it seriously about putting biodiversity into housing estates and stop making them look like you could be anywhere. And that's what we need to do, because that addresses island heat effect. And I don't know if you're like it, but I now have to take the temperature of the street pavement if I take my dog out for a walk, because there's no trees. If there's trees, we'll do it. And if European countries can put trees in everywhere, we can do it. So it's things looking at that, and it has to be a dynamic change, not just for local government, but those that are invested in developing in this country have to get serious about climate change and not profit. And that's my own views. That is my professional views, not the council's views, I should say.
Well, I think you'll have a lot of friends with you here tonight on that one.
Might get a lot of house builders coming after me if they see this on YouTube. But anyway,
we'll provide you with a protection team. So I shall move on to Trevor now. Thank you, Trevor, from the Improvement Service. Some of you might not have heard of the Improvement Service, but Trevor's going to explain what they do and a little bit about heads of planning and what they do too. So over to you now, Trevor. Thanks.
I will be quite quick. I'm very much a bonus presentation for today's session. I'm sure you'd much rather hear from Anthony and Gillian again, but I'll leave some time at the end for some of the more questions, because they were quite good, the ones that were coming in. I'm the Heads of Planning in Scotland Secretary. Heads of Planning, if you're not aware, are the representation organisation for all of the senior planners within local government. We work with all 34 planning authorities, and I'll just flick on to my next slide. We kind of work through with a committee structure, which is an executive committee made of heads of service, through 5 subcommittees, which planners like Anthony and Gillian are members of. And I just must stress that this is above and beyond their day job. This is them volunteering themselves to be to kind of help overall planning performance across Scotland, trying to work together. So we do have committees in development management, the application process, development planning, which is what we're hearing tonight, and other bits of work, performance and practice, which used to manage the national planning performance framework reports, which don't exist anymore. I'll come on to that in a little bit. We have a committee on climate change, energy and resources, which looks at often things like wind farms, but much more pressing kind of renewable energy, and battery storage is one of our key issues of late. And finally, digital planning, which is, I don't know if you're aware of the significant budget hits that's taken at the end of last year's budget, and the Scottish Government programme shutting down, and HOPs are somewhat stepping in to kind of look at what can be taken ahead. I've got another quick slide of what we do. Said before, it's an organisation. Basically, the biggest part of our job is getting planning authorities to speak together, to look at good practice, to look at what can be done, what can be shared amongst themselves, to kind of try and find out what's best, and hope authorities can use that. One thing we didn't touch upon before in Anthony and Gillian's presentations, I don't think it was in the brief, but was the different methodology used by authorities throughout the evidence reports and proposed plan stages of the LDP work. But it's not just that, it's everything that authorities do. We also do collaborative responses to consultation papers. I'm sure you're well aware of how many consultation papers the Scottish Government are putting out of late. And we do work with the Scottish Government quite closely to kind of help improve practice, and certainly through National Planning Framework, where we had a lot of discussion with them to try and contribute to the policies to make them as good as they possibly could be. Other engagement with stakeholders, we do engage with the likes of Homes of Scotland and various other bodies, property federations and things like that, on a kind of organisational basis, so to kind of limit the work needs to be done by individual authorities. And another big part of my job is research on behalf of the planning authorities. The top one there, I'll send links through Barry. The top one there is the Future Planners bit of research my colleague Amy carried out last year, looking at the number of planners coming into the system, and it's kind of worrying that given the 128 additional bits of work that planners need to do throughout the LDP process, the number of planners coming into the system full stop is kind of slowing down. So that bit of work looked at that and kind of looked at new methods going into that. Other kind of key bits of work, I do look at planning fees and resources for local authorities, and there's a consultation on that just now that will be responded to on behalf of HOPs. And finally, another big part of our work is staffing and skills. Obviously, with MPF4, there's been a lot more pressure put on planning officers to do bits of work that they possibly didn't have to do before, and or they had specialist staff which may no longer be there with the kind of dwindling resources coming into planning authorities. So just trying to get them to collaborate as much as possible to make these things as best as they possibly can be. I'll quickly move on because we've got kind of want to leave more time for questions. I'll put some links there for the HOPS website. That's got all our previous consultation responses and some resources as well on it. And we are on Twitter or X or whatever it's called nowadays. And probably one thing I didn't touch upon in the last slide is what HOPS can and can't do. One of the things that we do get lots of requests on is casework, and HOPS can't really touch casework at all. Probably similar to what you've heard from Scottish Government staff. It's really down to the individual planning authorities. But we do look, certainly some of the things I've received in the HOPS website has been kind of good case studies of things that have worked really well, and that it's kind of refreshing to hear that from community bodies and the likes. So always happy to hear things that are working and things that maybe not be. We can certainly raise it with committees. HOPS is the biggest part of my job, but Claire also asked me to cover the improvement service work as well. Some very dry slides here for you, but you can go away and read the IS strategic framework and what we do. The IS on the whole is a kind of supportive organisation, and we cover lots of different things. There are the likes of myself who are kind of based within professional groups, like the Head to Planet Scotland. We also work with the Sustainable Scotland Network and Leaders of Economic Development. There are people like me to do that supportive work, but we cover basically everything that local authority covers. We've got people on money advice, people working with children's rights, research. We've got digital products and all sorts of other things. I'll divert you to the website if you want to know more, but I kind of pulled a slide with some links on it of kind of the most pertinent things for tonight, mainly our planning projects. I'll firstly touch on the Spatial Hub, which is one of the national repositories for data that local authorities create. Basically, the gist of that is to have kind of data created by authorities available to all local authorities in standardised methods. But the Spatial Hub staff also work on other projects where that data is useful. Some of you might be aware through your local place plan work with community councils of Community Map Scotland, which is a kind of supportive digital tool. If not, I'll send the link. It's I think there's still free licenses up until the end of the year available for community councils for that. And they also manage Tell Me Scotland, which is a portal for planning applications and updates. Second project I wanted to talk about is more about, it's been a lot of research work and collaborative work being carried out in individual local authorities through the Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme. The aim of that programme is to kind of look at the attributes of what makes a good place and what's been done in certain areas to kind of for that to happen. And there's some really good case studies on the link that you'll get tomorrow, and a kind of list of indicators of what makes a good place, and it ties in really well with the Place Standard tool, which I'm sure you're aware of. Aware of time here, and two more to go. The National Planning Improvement Champion is a kind of newly appointed post that sits within the Improvement Service. I mentioned the Planning Performance Framework reports before. This new post has been created to kind of look at kind of a much more holistic manner of planning performance, which covers everything. And there was a call for ideas, and the report's been published for all the feedback that received on that. It's probably quite a good read. I really want to encourage communities to look at that, as well as the development industry and local authorities. Just what a good planning system and service from local authorities looks like. And finally, probably the one that more people are aware of is the Community Council's website, which has got some resources, some training, and other related things. It's probably where you're most likely to engage with Improvement Service. I've worked more directly with the planning authorities, but there are staff there that you probably deal with on a more regular basis. Happy to answer any questions on the improvement service, and as Claire mentioned before, I do work really closely with Anthony and Gillian, and I am a planner too. I'll pass back to Claire just now.
Lovely, thank you, Trevor. I was just wondering, with regard to training for community councils, and what sort of things the improvement service might help with, if any, for people, either community councils or maybe non-community councils. Is there for training, and do you sort of accept requests for training at all?
They do. It's not me that deals with the community councils directly, but they do accept. They would look at requests, and they would look at the bodies they deal with. Certainly, they've done a lot of work with Plan and Aid Scotland in the past about kind of work being carried out on. I think they had some stuff on local place plans fairly recently. Certainly, I can pass on my colleagues' contact details, and I'm sure they'd consider it. Obviously, planning, community council being a statutory consultee for planning, it's kind of fairly high on their agenda to look at, and they do regularly cover planning-based things. I think the next webinar is on empty homes, planning and housing being quite high up the agenda, but certainly happy to put the likes of Claire in touch with them. But I'm sure they've got a portal as well that you can ask for suggestions, certainly from community councils.
Cool, and I don't know if we've got any questions from anybody else, but otherwise I'll ask one more about the heads of planning, and I think Anne's wanted to come in, but the heads of planning. I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can feed into or communities might engage with the heads of planning at all? Is there what sort of opportunities are there with that group?
That's probably a more tricky one to answer. Obviously, Anthony and Gillian have volunteered themselves to come out tonight to speak to you. But part of our programme this year is to improve our engagement. Obviously, it's probably not as good directly with communities as it should be. We do speak a lot to the development industry, but happy to kind of take suggestions. That there is a contact us box on the HOPS website. It's generally me that would respond to that as well if you put any suggestions in. We do occasionally run webinars that are open to the general public. We ran one at the end of last year with the DPA on planning appeals, which was quite well attended. I'm sure you recognise some of the names. They're not particularly common, but if there are opportunities for this to happen, certainly more than happy to engage with charities like yourself to kind of improve that communication, improve what the training we're carrying out with the planning officers to open that up to others as well.
Great, thanks. I've just got one question before I bring you in, Anne. There's a question. Can you? I think this is more for Anthony, though possibly. Can you explain a bit about renewable energy developments like battery sites, and how they're going to be viewed in LDPs? In NPF4, they don't seem to be categorised as industry, but they feel very industrial to local communities.
I was hoping Trevor would take that question because he's been at enough committees that he could probably answer it. I'm joking, Trevor.
You're the local authority. I'll let you answer that, but I think I can assist if you need any help.
So, as we've talked about, protecting the environment, protecting nature, protecting the climate, all very important. We can't do that unless we transition to renewable energy. And we can't do that unless we do this properly and think through the whole chain about how we do that. So if you take wind farms for an example, a lot of them get switched off because the grid can't take any more electricity. So all the time that they could be turning and generating electricity to make it cheaper for people or to look at community renewable energy schemes, they are switched off because the grid doesn't need it, the grid can't take it. That's where battery storage comes in really handy, because you can keep it going, you can store it, and it is there to be used. And then there's ways of, if that energy can be used for community power itself, or look at cheaper ways to do it in a community and do that, you can get into those conversations with developers. So battery storage is a fundamental part of moving to a renewable energy and decarbonisation of heat and energy systems and meeting all of these targets going forward. How they're sited, where they're located, and all of that still needs to be better. A lot of this stuff could be underground in brownfield land if you can put the safety requirements into it. The difficulty with that is brownfield land, a lot of it tends to be near settlements. And if batteries explode because they're full of cobalt, bang, it's like hydrogen, you wouldn't have it near you. So these things tend to have to be in rural areas or in industrial areas out with blast zones, just in case. It's the same idea if you're near whiskey distilleries or things like that with ethanol. If that blows, there's a blast radius, and we have to look at this in planning terms of where we put things in proximity to residential areas or areas where people are. We've got to look at blast zones, and that's what health and safety executives tell us to do. So it's a little bit of an insight if you didn't know that we have to look at blast zones just in case. So renewable energy, battery storage, and all that can catch fire. You've probably seen it all, turbines going on fire when they spin too fast. There's all those things. So battery storage is a fundamental way of how to move to green renewable energy and how to store energy and to stop wind farms or hydro schemes and all that getting turned off. So it's important. Where you put it, how you protect it, and how you don't make it an eyesore, very difficult. Also, where it needs to kind of go is like where there's primary quality agricultural land, or good quality agricultural land, or it's near forestry and woodland, and it's all of these things. And it's the same where you put solar farms as well. They tend to be that place. So we need to look at how to coexist with these things going forward. And that's very difficult for a local development plan to do. So what I would say is battery storage, the renewable energy policies in NPA4 cover it. It is covered under renewable energy. That's how we would assess it. And then all the other policies come into play depending on where it is located. There is issues with fire safety, how you do all of that. There is a ton of things that you have to look at, not just from a planning point of view, but a building standards point of view as well. And they are controversial at the moment. But if you look back 20 years ago, wind farms were controversial, still are. Hydro schemes were controversial, still are. But if we're serious about addressing climate change, we need to move to these things, and we need to make sure if we're investing in these big, massive turbines, which can have, depending where they have, impacts on communities and all of that, then you want to make sure they're doing their job and providing electricity 24/7 where they can, and they're not getting switched off and they're just sitting there doing nothing for hours on a day. So the only way to do that is battery storage and store it. In future, I would hope that if we move to new models of how we deal with all of this stuff and energy efficiency from buildings and where people stay and all of that, that we can integrate these things into houses or community things. So the need for battery storage in the rural areas is less and less and less if we can actually integrate this in how we develop and power communities of the future, while maintaining safety and things don't go boom, is hopefully where I think we need to get to be fully green, to be fully, cheap electricity and all that, and to address fuel crises, poverty crisis, fuel poverty crises, and all of these things. So if you think about it at that extreme, it's a new technology and we need it. So the only places that these things can get put at the moment is away from where people live. And if you take it that you'd rather have it go boom in the rural area, if it does or it goes on fire, that it's away from you, then you can see it. But again, it's that balancing point I keep coming on to. Renewable energy is important to address climate change and to address environment, to address biodiversity. But how do you protect the nature crisis at the same time as the climate crisis? So there's a question to pose back to everybody. How do you do the same thing? Because if anybody can tell me, then I'm out of a job, because balancing all of that goes. So it is an NPA4 as part of the renewable energy. Some of that might fall into infrastructure development and other parts of it, but it also has to be considered in addressing the climate change, because that's the policy number one. So that's where it would be. Where local authorities want to change that for local circumstances, i.e., I work for a political environment, our members have a great say in all of this sort of thing, they might choose not to allow renewable energy developments or battery developments in rural areas. So then we have to look at different points of views. So it's a complex system balancing of views of where you put things. What battery storage is needed. Otherwise, sticking things out in the sea like sea green and turning them off when you've got a good wind because the grid can't cope doesn't make sense of putting all that investment into it. And if there's ways to benefit communities of getting cheaper electricity through having battery storage near to them and things like that as a community benefit, then we need to look at those things seriously. But I get the furore and the concern about residents about them. They're ugly. So how do you make them better? So you can site them. You can use green infrastructure to encapsulate them. You can basically hide them, or you could try to underground them if we can get around the health and safety aspects of that. I think undergrounding would be the best bit, especially in brownfield land. But there's a lots of ifs, buts and maybes that I can't answer for you apart from that. Hopefully that gets you somewhere where my thinking is. Trevor, I take it that's what you were going to say?
There's more than I was going to say, Anthony. Certainly, you touched upon probably things I wasn't going to say about the kind of needs for them, just with the ever quickly increasing technology and what's going to be done with it, and to actually make some new renewable energy sites viable. I've seen some comments in the chat as well. I probably want to kind of touch on the safety concerns as well. I think Paul mentioned in the chat the statutory consultees and where battery storage sits within that, because it doesn't have the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service or HSE as statutory consultees just now, and the difficulty of these sites coming forward a lot quicker than probably they're expected, and the very quickly increasing technology of them. Hops are considering it, are in discussion with Scottish Government, are in discussion with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service to see what can be done. But yeah, it's kind of I watch this space just now. I don't know if Anthony's got anything else to say on them, but yeah, they are a hot topic.
It's the same with solar. It's the same with solar farms. In Angus, it's the same with solar farms and prime quality agricultural land. But there is ways and means to make the two coexist. Solar energy developments don't need to be at ground level. If you've seen them in Australia and if you've seen them in other places, they coexist with agriculture very, very well. It's just they have to be properly planned, sited, and elevated. But elevating something again, a lot of people are quite rightly, protective of views, especially into the Angus Glens and all of that as well. However, there has to be a balancing act, because we need to move to this, because if everybody looks at their fuel prices, they're going through the roof. We need to move to clean renewable energy sources as quickly as we can. And again, the business models will have to change to enable us to get to clean, cheap electricity for communities, unless we think differently. So all of this stuff, there's pros and cons to it, and it is a very hot controversy. We just have to take the emotion out of it and balance it in terms of what the needs are for the area and how we move to transition to net zero. Again, you're lucky because you've got somebody that's got environment and climate change in their tack. It can see it from both angles here. Hopefully that does give a bit of an explanation of how we take these things into view and how we must balance them.
Okay, thank you. Anne, I think would it be okay if we answer your question when we're later on, because we've come to the end of the session. We are planning to do some more of these, possibly I think in the autumn. Is that right, Kat? So maybe put forward some ideas if you've got any specific topics that you would like us to cover in future webinars. And we look forward to seeing you all in the autumn, I guess, if not before. So thank you very much to our speakers tonight, and I thought it was a great session and really enlightening. And thank you all for your engagement over all of the webinars, actually. And yeah, as we say, please don't forget to donate and give us a few pennies, because we really do need it. And yeah, I think that it's a wrap.